Tennessee's football offensive success, I would say, had you asked me, is two things. It's the state of college football, and it's Josh Heupel taking advantage of the state of college football. So the state of college football is allowing offensive linemen to release and get downfield on passing plays. So essentially, you have blockers 5 yards downfield. Whereas the NFL, they allow you like a yard. You can't get downfield on a passing play, but you're able to release with the RPOs. So I think that Josh Heupel has done a fantastic job of taking advantage of that. But this was interesting to me. You brought up that last year, 28.38 points per game was the lowest in FBS since 2011. Georgia won the national title with a ball control offense. And Alabama is bringing in Tommy Rees to return to old school ball control style. So you're either ahead of the curve or you're behind the curve. You're never the same. You're never, ever the same in sports and probably life. Is Josh Heupel more ahead of the curve or behind the curve based off the numbers that we dug up at our 3:45 a.m. production meeting?
We would have to say he's ahead of the curve, right? I mean, because if everything's declining, but his is going up, I would say he's ahead of the curve, and being unique like that really stands out. Okay, let's go. And it's not like he's okay. Behind the curve would be if he had an offensive system that had been done before, and then he was just it had already been established. This is a offensive system that hasn't been figured out yet. This isn't. So 2013, Butch Jones introduces a spread with the zone read. Dave, you know this. The spread had already taken over college football. It had already been established as an offense, hadn't it? For 7. Urban Meyer had already won 2 national titles and was about to win a 3rd at Ohio State.
Agreed.
And so that was 7 years in. Heupel's offense has not been established across the country yet. So I would say he's ahead of the curve for that. Interestingly enough, 2021 was the lowest scoring average season since 2011 until 2022. And it's something that I think what's happening is people are moving the ball faster, but they're not scoring at the same pace. And Heupel is moving the ball fast, but scoring at the frenetic pace. So I think it's a major paradox, and you're not really noticing it. And some people are accusing Iowa of just skewing the whole thing by themselves, but that's not happening. Yeah. And another point to bring up is the last 2 years, Michigan has finally gotten over the hump, won the Big Ten, and made the college football playoff. They've been a ball control team ever since Jim Harbaugh got there. And there was a genuine belief that Michigan was behind the curve with their ball control offense, and that's why they couldn't beat Ohio State. Well, look at what they've done the last 2 years. And so this is an intriguing trend, but I think that gives an advantage to Josh Heupel going the other way.
I think what you said stands out the most about probably a minute ago, and that was there's not a lot of people doing it. When it gets to the point, I mean, how many teams are running what Josh Heupel runs right now at a high level that are top 25, top 40 programs? Did you say Southern Cal? Did you say sort of TCU, but it's not really the same?
It's not the same offense at all.
Yeah. I mean, but tempo, that's what I mean. I'm reaching, admittedly, to try to think of more than a couple, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams that are running anything similar to what he's running. And by the way, within 2 years, when we have this conversation, it'll be 10 to 12 at least. Within 5 years, it'll be 15 to 20 or more that are running a Josh Heupel style system. All these coaches study other offensive and defensive schemes in the offseason. So you're going to see Josh Heupel's stamp on college football in the coming years. But back to my original question, Caleb.
Well, so I might say Jeff Levy too. Now, Jeff Levy has his own philosophy, but he did coach under Josh Heupel for 2 years, and he's now at Oklahoma. So, and I think Brent Venables is giving him the keys to the offense to run it, which I don't think is a great sign. I think it's one thing to have an offensive coach who gives the keys to the defense. I don't know if you ever like a defensive coach who doesn't at least have his hands somewhat in the offense. You see what I'm saying? And
yeah, because if you're a defensive coach, you build the program, including practice and game plan, around your defense to some extent, which that could take away snaps from the offense. No, I think you bring up a great point. You're in a much better situation where if you have an offensive coach and you hand it over to Tim Banks as opposed to vice versa. Completely agree.
right, exactly. Because let's be honest, Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, they're all in the offensive meetings. They're not just trying to run their defense and letting the offense do its job. That's what Jeremy Pruitt was doing. And that was
No, I was told by a coach on Saban's staff one time that it wasn't unusual for him on a Thursday evening to take the offensive or defensive plan, the game plan, and tear it up and start all over on Thursday night before a Saturday game. Can you imagine that? You put all that work in and you've got less than 48 hours and he just tears it up and you're like, crap. I guess we'll come up with something else.
Total deviation, David, you tell me, and you may know more. There's always been the debate that Saban's a recruiter, but not a technician analytically, X's and O's. So what you're saying is he actually is an X's and O's genius too.
I think he's the best defensive backs coach that's ever walked the face of the earth. I do believe that. I think he kind of came up with that, and people still use it to this day, but he was the first of how you keep your hands lower than essentially your elbows or your shoulders so you can guide receivers. And if you kept it low, you didn't get the pass interference call. If you got it up high on somebody's shoulder pads, you're going to get pass interference every time. I think he's an incredible defensive backs coach. That was always the one question I had about Derek Dooley going back is what does he do really, really well? What's his foundation?
He would have said special teams and receivers.
Oh, that's horrible. I mean, if anybody says special teams, you got to go to the next dude. You got to go, okay, cross that one off the list. Receivers, maybe, but I think that's a little bit of a reach in retrospect. Ultimately, when I look at Tennessee's offensive success, I don't think there's any way Josh Heupel is behind the curve. I think he's still ahead of it. When you talk about Georgia and Alabama, don't we have to almost look at them with a caveat? I mean, don't we have to look at them as they're the most talented teams? I mean, if Georgia and Alabama said, hey, guys, we're going to start running the wing T this year, do you not think that they would be fairly successful at it? They might not win a national championship, but they'd win 9 games.
Well, it's funny because I have said for years, not the wing T, which still has the receivers, but I have said for years that someone needs to bring back the single wing, where you have 2 running quarterbacks and you don't know who's going to take the snap. That's how the single wing worked.
And I agree with that, and I've thought about that before. Maybe the old Georgia Tech offense, but the simple fact is you could never recruit. Like you could flip it in a year. Like Alabama, if Kirby Smart and Nick Saban said this is my last year and I want to go out with a bang, they could fire an offensive coordinator and put in that type of offense. But after that, you wouldn't be able to recruit to it.
You probably wouldn't. Although it would turn out a lot of NFL offensive linemen. I mean, heck, Nebraska, say what you want. You wanted to go to Nebraska if you were trying to get to the NFL as a lineman. I mean, they were going to churn you out. And so, and as a running back.
To the point that walk-ons would go and grow into all Big 12 type of players. I mean, they were taking walk-ons at times that were because there were only so many spots with scholarship-wise. But
and offensive line is the hardest position to scout, and they scouted it well.
Oh, yeah. Very underrated in what they did there. So, I think that Tennessee's still ahead of the curve. I think Tennessee is going to continue to be ahead of the curve for about 3, 4, 5 more years. And then I think that defenses will adapt. But at that point, I believe the theory is that Tennessee's defense will be good enough where you'll see a couple of those 4-minute drives per game where they run a little bit of the clock, get the defense fresher, and it'll be a game changer in the way that Tennessee's offense looks. They'll still run speed and tempo, but they won't be afraid to slow it down in the second quarter, maybe for 1 4-minute, 6-minute drive to be able to get their defense a little bit more fresh. So I think that's where you're going to see it change. But again, Georgia, who we cited, won a national title with ball control offense, and Alabama bringing in Tommy Rees to run an old school ball control style. I mean, that's all true, but I think we're talking about talent at a whole different level than really anybody else in the nation. Maybe Ohio State, but maybe Michigan. But still, I'll take the big nasties from down south before I'll take the big nasties from anywhere else in the country. That's why Oregon will never win a national title.
Well, and Ohio State is the one state that has talent, like on the Ohio has talent on the level of an SEC state. Like it just does.
Sure.
And
probably second to LSU in terms of keeping in-state commitments.
Yeah. I mean, who is it? You're telling me Cincinnati can't compete with Ohio State, Dave?
Yeah, they cannot.
So it's funny here. I actually think it's a little simpler. I think, yes, Tennessee's offense, I think the offense eventually gets figured out in 5 years. By that point, you've had so much success, you got a recruiting machine on the level of Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, so it doesn't really matter if your offense is figured out. I mean, that's really the goal at that point, is just to have such credibility as a head coach that you can recruit. Steve Spurrier's offense was figured out by 1997. He still went to South Carolina and had the best run in South Carolina history because he could get elite talent because he was Steve Spurrier. The success he had when he was ahead of the curve mattered. I mean, look at Bruce Pearl in basketball. Bruce Pearl brought in the press defense and the flex offense when nobody in the SEC was running it. They figured it out in 4 years. So what? Bruce Pearl was a household name by that point, and it was very easy for him to recruit at that point. So the goal is become a household name before you're figured out. And if you are, it doesn't even matter if you're figured out because then you're going to recruit the best talent anyway.
I got no argument with any of that.